Hi, I'm Robin Powley. I'm a behavior analyst and a special educator. I have created a workshop about a tier 2 intervention. Oftentimes, I think BCBAs aren't involved in tier 2 or tier 1 interventions. And I think it's really important for us to get involved in these interventions as we can really help prevent future problem behaviors using interventions that require less staff and less resources in a school. So it helps us be more proactive. So check in, check out is a widely used research supported tier 2 intervention designed to increase positive behavior, strengthen student and adult connections, and reduce problem behaviors in school settings. Whether you're a school-based clinician, a behavior analyst, or an administrator, today's workshop will deepen your understanding of how check in and check out serves as a practical, research-based intervention to support students with emerging behavioral needs. So this is the thing that sometimes people dismiss as just a point sheet or a morning hello, but we're going to dig a little bit deeper and talk about how to actually make it work as a strategic tier 2 behavioral intervention. Whether you're consulting or embedded in a school, you've probably seen a check-in and check-out used well, possibly used poorly, or let's be honest, maybe not used at all. So the goal today is to help you move that needle on data, on skill development, and on how teams view and implement tier 2 supports. So we'll explore all of those pieces today. So these are just some housekeeping pieces. We're going to watch the video. You'll have a quiz at the end, and you'll put in your BACB certification number, and then you'll get your certificate emailed to you. If you have any questions, feel free to email support@masteraba.com. So our objectives for today are describing the behavioral principles that make this intervention effective, identifying the core components of high fidelity implementation, using data to evaluate student progress and inform decisions, avoiding some common pitfalls, and modifying it to fit your learner profile. Check-in and check-out is one of the most efficient and scalable tier 2 supports available. It promotes connection, structure, and reinforcement, especially for students who need just a bit more than the universal supports that tier 1 students get. So with thoughtful intervention, it can improve student behavior and motivation, reduce referrals and classroom interruptions, strengthen relationships with trusted adults, and give schools that real-time behavioral data to guide decision. So here's what we're working towards. These objectives are meant to be practical, not just things to know, but things that you can actually take back and apply. And those are some of the handouts that are attached to this workshop. You'll also get examples in there of different check-in, check-out sheets for students of different age levels. We'll walk through both the behavioral why and the structural how of check-in, check-out. And I'll give you some real life examples and tools to ground this in your own work. So the behavior science behind check-in, check-out, it works because it systematically applies ABA foundational principles. So we know that reinforcement is the backbone of behavior and ABA. So reinforcement is adult attention, which is delivered consistently and contingently. Motivating operations are leveraged by building in anticipation of praise and success. The morning check-in and afternoon checkout serves as a discriminative stimuli that cue expectations and reinforcement. Daily feedback involves behavior-specific praise, shaping desired behaviors over time. This way, staff are using different verbal prompts during transitions to help guide appropriate responses. So this structure brings behavior under stimuli control. And because we collect daily data, we can make decisions about fading, intensifying, or adapting interventions, all grounded in objective evidence. This is the core principle that drives check in and check out. And how it works is that the student receives praise, attention, and tangible rewards, whether it's stickers, tokens, a lottery, or access to a preferred item or person for meeting daily behavioral goals like following directions, being on task, transitioning without refusal. And why does that matter? It matters because behaviors are reinforced. Behaviors that are reinforced are more likely to happen again. By consistently pairing desired behaviors with positive outcomes, you shift the student's behavioral patterns over time. When we talk about motivating operations and establishing operations, when a student values the social attention of their check-in, check-out mentor, or is motivated by the reinforcement offered at the end of the day, that increases the value of engaging in those desired behaviors. That daily check-in and rewards become powerful motivators, shifting the establishing operation in favor of school appropriate behaviors. Check-in and check-out includes proactive supports that make the target behaviors more likely to occur. So the morning check-in serves as a predictable priming event, reminding the student of behavior expectations and providing encouragement before problems can arise. Goal review and prompts are reviewing goals ahead of time, which clarifies what's expected and reduces ambiguity for students. This is a critical piece for students who struggle with executive functioning. Check-in and check-out builds momentum by starting the day with a positive interaction with an adult. And this is an adult that's not the student's teacher. And it increases the likelihood of compliance and engagement early in the school day. This ties in with the PREMAC principle, which is grandma's role, right? Whereas access to something reinforcing, like a positive check-in, is made contingent on completing a low probability behavior, which is engaging in school routines, as an example. There's differential reinforcement. Check-in, check-out naturally incorporates differential reinforcement of alternative behavior. For example, instead of avoiding tasks or shutting down, the student earns points or feedback for joining group activities, participating, or asking for help. The teacher or the check-in, check-out coordinator, and we're going to talk about the differences of those two, reinforces these alternatives consistently across the day. That's the teacher's job, is to give that feedback during the school day. And that's especially during problem times. It's the morning and the afternoon checkout that the check-in, check-out coordinator is the reinforcement person who is doing that kind of data collection and that touch point. So the student has multiple people in the building. Data-based decision-making tracks data across time, usually a daily point sheet or a behavior tracker, which aligns with ABA's emphasis on objective, observable data. BCBAs can evaluate whether behavior is changing in response to the intervention, if generalization is occurring, and if the intervention is effective without needing more restricted support. So there's rule-governed behavior. Many students with executive functioning challenges or attention getting, the function of their behavior is attention getting, benefit from externalized structures and simple rules like I get points when I follow directions. It creates a predictable routine with clear contingencies, helping the student make the connection between their own behavior and consequences over time. So we know here that Tier 1 are the universal strategies for all students. All students are Tier 1 students. I'm going to just move myself so you can see it. So all students are Tier 1 students first. Every student walks in as a Tier 1 student, even students who have individual education plans. But we all know students who need just a little more support to stay regulated and engaged. So even though we have 80% of our learners, which is, are successful with school-wide interventions, that then there's tier two. That's 15% of the population. They don't respond to tier one interventions alone. You keep the tier one interventions, and tier two interventions are specialized for learners who are at risk for academic or social failure due to behavioral challenges. So check in, check out is a tier two intervention. It provides the consistent, structured support before problem behaviors occur and escalate or become ingrained in students. It fills that gap between whole class supports and individualized plans. So we have tier one, tier two, and tier three. And that tier three group is really just 5%, 3 to 5% of the population. And those are the students who have the intensive chronic behavioral challenges, who need an FBA, who have perhaps an individual education plan and really need that response from a school system. So a standard protocol for a tier two intervention are students who have mild to moderate problem behavior that are occurring in multiple settings, emerging patterns of defiance, off-task behavior, or low motivation. They have a strong response to adult attention, positive or negative. We know attention can be both positive or negative. Some social skills, but inconsistent self-regulation or follow-through. School systems are overwhelmed. There's a need for efficient, scalable supports that build positive relationships, use minimal resources. And I'm going to stress that a lot in this workshop, that we really need to be using minimal resources for this intervention, not spending too much time. And I'm not saying that to be negative. I'm saying that that's the point of this tier two intervention. We also have data for decision making. We really want to differentiate tier two interventions. The goal for tier two is to have a lower effort required by staff. So 15% of the student population who are at risk for, but not currently engaging in severe problem behaviors. We know as BCBAs, we are usually brought into situations when the behavior is severe. And I think we need to work backwards in our roles so we can be more preventative and address our 7 dimensions of ABA. So if you're looking at a school of 500, perhaps 75 of these students will require tier two support. And if there are more than that who require tier two support, we need to be looking at our tier one interventions. What are our universal strategies? And do we have enough? And are they working or are they not working? Because if you have too many students who are requiring tier two supports, we need to be looking backwards. So tier two supports can involve social skill training for anger management or other curriculums that can be used across a group of students. We know tier three, as I said, is specialized and individualized systems for students with those high-risk behaviors. And I am just talking about behaviors here. For these students, we know an FBA may need to be conducted, and then this information is used to develop an individualized behavior support. So all of that being said, tier one matters. A strong foundation of expectations, reinforcement systems, and social emotional learning helps most, if not all, students. Some students need more. Think about the student who always is dysregulated during transitions, or the one who shuts down at work time, or is constantly at the teacher's desk needing more attention. These aren't your tier three kids. They don't need a full FBA. They need consistent, positive feedback, clear goals, and perhaps a little more adult attention throughout the day. That's where tier two lives. It's targeted, it's short term, and it's meant to keep students from falling through the cracks. And check in, check out is one of the cleanest, most scalable tools we've got for doing just that when it's done well. So to be an effective, I'm going to move myself again. To be an effective tier two strategy, it must be able to be implemented quickly. So we know as BCBAs, it may take weeks of assessment prior to developing a comprehensive behavioral support plan. Tier 2 strategies should take about a week to begin. So this means students should be identified quickly and proactively, which means your school may need or already have a system of referral. I like to look at risk factors such as often office discipline referrals. How often is a student being referred to the office for behavior, for absences or tardies, or teacher referrals? Some schools don't even have an office discipline referral system. These are some things that may need to be put in place. So, quick access matters. Students should be able to start Tier 2 interventions immediately after identification. No long delays for paperwork or meetings. Fast access equals faster behavioral change. Staff should be trained on their role in the intervention. This doesn't have to be lengthy. The intervention should be consistent with the school-wide expectations. So the burden of these interventions is usually with the support of a check-in, check-out supervisor. And this can be a guidance counselor, a paraprofessional, an SEL specialist, or anyone that the school can train. The intervention procedures for all students participating should be systematic and standardized. Crone et al. In 2010 states that teams should meet regularly and have systematic procedures for monitoring, troubleshooting, and adding or removing students to or from this intervention. That means decisions are based, again, on data from a number of different supports and sources. So let's start with the big picture. Even schools with strong tier 1 systems are seeing more children who need targeted behavioral support. But the system cannot handle sending everyone to tier 3. And sometimes that happens. We skip right over tier 2. And tier 2 is really important when we look at the big picture. Think of it as a behavioral booster shot, preventative, short-term, and responsive. Check in, check out is that intervention. And when done right, it builds the momentum. But the problem is it's often misunderstood or thrown together too casually. So we know tier 1 matters. We know a strong foundation of expectations matters. But we also know that we need to be targeted and efficient when we're doing tier 2. So what is check-in and check-out? I'm going to move myself again. So according to Brune and Mitchell in 2014 and 2011, check-in, check-out is the most widely implemented evidence-based tier 2 intervention. Check-in and check-out is a targeted intervention that builds connections, provides frequent feedback, and increases structure for students. It's a daily behavioral coaching routine designed to set students up for success. So we know that one of the 7 dimensions of behavior is parsimony, and we often work backwards in schools. We're doing really complex things before we're looking at what is the easiest solution. So behavior is learned and can be changed through reinforcement. Connection is a protective factor for student behavior and well-being. Simple systems, when used consistently, can yield powerful outcomes. So check-in, check-out is a school-based intervention. You'll often see it in PBIS, but sometimes if you're not a PBIS school, you still can use check-in, check-out. So it provides daily support and monitoring to students who are at risk for developing serious or chronic behaviors. This is for students who aren't responding to that school-wide or classroom preventative approaches. And perhaps they receive several referrals per year. So we know that students who aren't responding to the teacher's interventions may need tier 2, but we know that if they're not responding to tier 2, we may need to go back and look at tier 1 to see if there's enough support within the general school-wide system. So who is it for? Because it's not for everyone. It's ideal for students who are starting to show patterns of disengagement or disruption or low motivation. The key here is to intervene early before these behaviors become chronic. So there are 2 procedural goals for check-in and check-out. Goals Goal one includes self-monitoring, self-instruction, self-evaluation, and self-recruitment of feedback and help. It's based on behavioral principles and research. So first we are clearly defining expectations, frequent feedback, and consistency. So students with 2 to 5 minor office discipline referrals are good candidates for this. Maybe they're the student who gets in trouble as soon as the teacher gives an instruction because they're unprepared. Students whose behaviors are not reinforced by adult attention or who even find adult attention aversive would not be a good candidate for check-in, check-out. This intervention could worsen the behavior. I'm going to talk later who this system can be modified for students who are not responding to check-in and check-out, but really we have to be really careful about throwing interventions at everybody because even tier 2 interventions are meant for certain populations. They are for students who engage in behaviors in multiple settings. It can look different at different grade levels. In elementary school, if the behaviors are only occurring during reading, or in middle or high school, these behaviors are only happening during a specific class or unstructured times, then a different intervention should be considered. A typical check-in, check-out student in elementary school might have difficulty taking their turn, refuse to share or work with others, be mildly aggressive towards peers, where there may be a poor ratio of student to teacher supervision. So this is not necessarily for students who have been sent to the office on the rare occasion or whose behavior is driven by a problem in the environmental setting, because we always want to look at the environment first. These are also students who are not needing a full behavioral assessment. So how does it work? Myself. So there's a morning check-in. At that time, there's goal setting, which are aligned to behavior expectations. There's daily feedback cards that have 2 to 5 goals max. And I have added in the handouts attached to this worksheet, this workshop, a number of different forms for you to use in high school, middle school, and elementary school, some examples of completed forms and blank forms. Home communication. So these 5 pieces make up the check-in and check-out routine. When each component is implemented consistently and with fidelity, students know what to expect and adults know how to respond. The system becomes a loop of predictability, feedback, and positive reinforcement. Check-in, check-out is based on that daily check-in and check-out systems that provide the student with immediate feedback on their behavior through a rating scale on a daily progress report. So you might see the initials DPR, and that's a daily progress report. And I'll be using that term often. And it increases positive adult interactions and attention. Students are given both immediate and delayed attention. Collaboration between home and school is a really important part of this system. It's encouraged by sending home each day a copy of the daily progress report to be signed by the caregivers and then returned the next day. I know we're we're in 2025, so we don't really have those sheets that you write on, and you can rip the piece of paper off and then you have the sheet with you so that it can be used, one sent home and a copy kept at school. But those really work well and they're faster than making photocopies. A critical feature of all interventions and for check-in, check-out is the use of daily data systems to evaluate whether it's working or not. That's a piece that I've seen in schools that's missing. There are no data systems put in place to see if a tier 2 intervention for behavior specifically are working. We know that there's a lot of data that around reading and math tier 2 interventions, not as much. I haven't seen a lot of it for behavior for tier 2 interventions. So Percentage points are earned on the daily progress report and are recorded on a summary graph for each student. Then these data are reviewed by the school's Tier 2 intervention team or a person at least every 2 weeks and are used to make any decision to continue or modify or fade the intervention. The efficiency of this intervention places low demands on time by all teachers and staff in the building. All staff should be trained to implement check-in, check-out. That includes teachers, because if you're not going to get the buy-in from teachers, this isn't going to work. The team meets regularly to review student data, to troubleshoot challenges, and to add or remove students from the program as needed. Unlike a Tier 3 intervention, which is an intensive individualized intervention, often requiring an FBA, there is no lengthy assessment process prior to a student receiving check-in, check-out support. And this intervention requires no more than 5 to 10 minutes per teacher per day. So this visual helps teams stay clear on the rhythm of check-in, check-out. It should be simple, it should be fast, and repeatable. So most schools can build this into the first and the last 5 to 10 minutes of the day with minimal disruption. Each student starts and ends the day with a positive contact with an adult in the school. It could be a paraprofessional or any other assigned adult. The student should receive frequent monitoring and behavioral feedback throughout the day. And that's from the teacher. The morning check-in, check-out coordinator should make sure that each student, and I say each student because there should be more than one student, has all the materials they need for the day and remind the student or students of the school-wide expectations. We know that in elementary school, it may not be as important to check for materials, but it will be for the older students. And we know for the little ones, they may need somebody to go and get them and do it in the classroom because they might not remember to come to a different setting. So here's where the student in this location picks up their daily progress report. I have examples of those different sheets, as I mentioned. So the morning check-in. The student begins their day by checking in with the designated adult. This isn't just a quick hello. It's a moment to build connection, review expectations, and set a positive tone for the day. It grounds the student in routine and it gives them a fresh start every day. Goal setting is aligned to behavioral expectations. So each student's goals are clearly tied to those school-wide interventions and school-wide expectations. So things like be safe, be respectful, or be responsible. These are broken down into simple, concrete behaviors that the student can work towards. Usually 2 to 5 goals maximum. The more specific and achievable, the better, but aligned also to your school's expectations. We can't reinforce something that we can't define. So we know that specific goals anchor the entire system. They make sure we're not just rewarding good behavior, but teaching and reinforcing the skills that students actually need to function in a classroom, like staying in their seat or using kind words or following adult directions the first time. When students know what's expected and adults know what to look for, that's when check-in, check-out actually starts to move the needle. So why does this matter? Because specific goals give staff a consistent way to rate behavior. And students get a fair shot at success when there are specific goals other than just be good. That's really hard to monitor and to collect data on. It reduces the subjectivity. What one adult might call respectful could look very different to another adult. Specific goals are also creating clear teaching opportunities and open the door for reinforcement to be delivered immediately and meaningfully. So this daily feedback card is the backbone of the check-in, check-out. So throughout the day, staff provide behavior-specific feedback and rate the student's performance for each goal during key periods. Perhaps it's during a transition. It keeps everyone on the same page and it provides the data we need to track growth and patterns. The afternoon checkout with reinforcement happens at the end of the day. Students check in with the same adult, perhaps that they started with. They review their points, they get verbal praise, and if they meet their goals, they can earn a reinforcer. This helps close that loop and builds a strong reinforcement history around school appropriate behaviors. I'll go into some more detail about reinforcement. Home communication. Students bring their daily point card home. This isn't busy work. It's a chance to connect schools and home, celebrate progress, and get families on board. Even a quick signature builds consistency and accountability. These 5 pieces are the engine that keeps check-in, check-out running. When they're done consistently and done well, students feel safe because they know exactly what to expect, and staff aren't guessing about how to respond. Morning check-ins and afternoon wrap-ups create bookends to the school day, while the feedback card during the day from teachers keeps the focus tight and behavior specific. The goals, they're not random. They're tied directly to what we want to see more of. And home communication, that's how we keep the momentum going outside the classroom. It's not just a checklist. It's a system of predictability, connection, and reinforcement that works. So the check-in, check-out coordinator, you have one for your building, but you can have other facilitators who see multiple students. This is one model where paraprofessionals conduct check-in and check-outs. If the coordinator is not available, perhaps on a given day, we know that schools and staff get busy. It's important that if the coordinator is unavailable, that there is somebody there to meet the students. There should be a location that's easily accessible and semi-private. This is especially true for middle and high school students who would often prefer to avoid drawing attention to their involvement in any intervention. Conversely, elementary school students often become excited about the intervention when they realize that students on check-in, check-out receive extra attention from the check-in, check-out staff. I include a number of formats again for all age groups. The training involved for the person managing these roles should understand how to use data for decision making. For instance, the behavior team will need to assess the effectiveness of the check-in, check-out system, office discipline records, referral data, graphs of success, attendance records, and academic performance. We don't know if the system is working if we're not taking data. I recommend the team meet biweekly to examine progress. That should take about a minute to pull up a student's progress based on how you're collecting the data. This allows staff to know if the intervention should continue, should be modified, or whether an additional layer of behavioral support should be added. Perhaps the student is ready for the intervention to be faded, which is great. And that's the goal. Lack of data is probably the primary mistakes made most by the behavior support team, which then leads and bleeds into teachers not buying in. So I do recommend an administrator be part of this, as they're the ones who will be committing to system change efforts. We want something that staff can buy into. So when training is developed for staff, an administrator should attend at least a half a day of the professional development. It's helpful for the administrator to also attend those biweekly meetings as well. So let's be honest, check-in, check-out has a PR problem. It's often treated like a sticker chart or smiley face system with no function or follow through. And when that happens, it doesn't work. But when we align it with behavioral science, it becomes one of the most efficient interventions we have. Establishing a commitment to this intervention is critical. This should be presented at a faculty meeting with a convincing explanation why this is going to benefit your system. Staff surveys may be helpful regarding Tier 2 interventions in the school, and then that data can be shared at the meeting. Some schools have an SEL coordinator, and that person can lead this while others have support staff leading it. So this intervention must be part of the person's job description, not an added responsibility. This means that the coordinator has the first half hour before school begins and after school ends devoted to this system. This person should be highly regarded by the students and interact positively and warmly with them. This person should also have experience in behavior interventions. There are multiple models that have worked for this system in schools. So a common misconception is that check-in, check-out is simply handing a student a sheet of behavior and tracking points throughout the day. While the DPR is a key component, the power of the check-in, check-out lies in the system built around it. The point sheet is only the record-keeping tool. That's what makes check-in, check-out effective. It's everything that happens before, during, and after those points are written down. If you have a student who's needing to see the check-in, check-out coordinator in the middle of the day, this is not the right intervention. The check-in, check-out happens in the morning and in the afternoon. Then reinforcement occurs in the afternoon. So relationship building. The check-in, check-out creates predictable moments for students to connect with a supportive adult every morning and every afternoon. That adult does not have to be the SEL, the guidance person. It can be the assistant principal. It has to be somebody who knows what's going on with the system. They might need some scripts to handle different kinds of behaviors, but these are brief but consistent check-ins, and they provide encouragement, problem solving, and positive action and attention that students may not get otherwise. There's going to need to be antecedent support. So the structure of check-in, check-out prevents behavior problems before they start. So students are greeted, they're reminded of their expectations, they're prompted to bring their materials, especially in middle and high school. They're given those cues for success throughout the day from their teacher. They're getting that frequent feedback. So unlike a typical classroom discipline system where feedback may come after misbehavior, the check-in, check-out embeds ongoing positive feedback across multiple settings and staff members. Therefore, that feedback isn't just busy work by a teacher. It's saying, well, you received a 2 because you did really well when you were following my directions. The teachers are still going to give feedback to the students, but it's not going to be anything that's going to be as negative. The data-driven decisions are teams using the percentages from the DPRs to make objective decisions about student progress, adjust goals, and eventually fade supports. The point sheet alone doesn't do that. It's the system that makes the data meaningful. The consistency across settings is really important. It ensures every adult that interacts with that student in a similar way reinforces school-wide expectations and reduces mixed messages. That is why all the teachers need to be on board and understand what this system is. It can't just be your behavioral support team or your learning community as the guidance department. It has to be the school building. So in short, the point sheet is the paper, but the check-in and check-out is the process. Without the check-ins, mentoring, prompts, reinforcement, and team review, paper has little value. It's the relationships, the routines, and data-based problem solving built around the sheet that change behavior. So the teacher's role. The teacher's role is to provide verbal and written feedback to the student at a predetermined time, dependent on the DPR. The feedback should be quick, should be positive, and help remind the student what they need to work on if the goal was not met. A sample feedback statement could be, you did a really nice job completing your work, so you receive a 2 for work completion. I had to remind you not to flick Robin's ponytail, so you got a 1 for keeping your hands, your feet, and objects to yourself. Teachers can also make a referral to the student support team about a student. So in collaboration with the teacher, the team will determine if the check-in, check-out is appropriate or whether another intervention would be more appropriate. The team should have a number of days allotted to provide feedback to the teacher. So that daily progress report should be quick and easy to score. The teacher is going to circle the highest number on the DPR if the student has met all the expectations. So let's say the teacher has to warn a student twice about behavior. If they might receive a 1. If they do not meet the expectations at all, perhaps 3 warnings, they get the lowest score. At the end of that class period, the teacher only needs to spend a minute or so with the student. It should not be lengthy. It should not take a lot of their time. It's best for the teacher to be specific about the feedback and again, to stay positive and cheerful. Obviously, enthusiasm is important for the best possible scores. However, lower scores do need an explanation. But keep that discussion upbeat, but also realistic in your explanation. The rating is final, and let them know you look forward to seeing them have more success the next day or period. It's not the teacher's role to provide reinforcement. That comes from the coordinator. So reinforcement should occur that day or the next day. The times are dependent on the school schedule. Students cannot miss academic time for this reinforcement. Perhaps it's at the end of the day when they are packing up and they can spend a little bit more time. However, it should be discussed as a team with the teacher involved. Extended delays in reinforcement, we know, result in student frustration and a reduced commitment to the interventions. I also want to say that teachers should receive reinforcement for their participation, as they're the backbones of an effective check-in, check-out intervention. I'm going to pause here before I move on to designing check-in, check-out to fit your school, and there'll be a short quiz.